Do chemtrails exist? And if so, what harm are they doing us? Or maybe they don't exist, and if so, what harm is such a belief doing to us? Time to look to the skies here on Things Visible and Invisible. Mick West is an entertainment entrepreneur, but in recent years has become increasingly interested in and skeptical about what are commonly referred to as chemtrails, which led him to create the website Contrailscience.com. He also runs Metabunk.org, a forum for the debunking of many theories from 9/11's conspiracies to the flat earth. He is the author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic and Respect, and he joins me down the line from his home in California. Mick, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Mick, let's start at the beginning with chemtrails, okay? Now, when I was growing up, nobody ever talked about chemtrails. There was just planes in the sky and they had a bit of exhaust and that was sort of it. Where did this whole business of chemtrails and all the thinking around it, conspiracies around it, theories around it, where did it actually begin?
Well, it's interesting. The chemtrail conspiracy theory is actually this theory that goes back to the 1990s, the late 1990s. And it was really the very early days of the internet where it started going. Like online chat forums back then were very, very simple text-based things. A lot of it was email chains. And people who were into conspiracy theories back before the internet used to communicate via like mailing little flyers to each other and magazines and meeting up in public. So this was like the early days of internet conspiracy theories. And what happened was, like, somebody once was, I guess, just looking up in the sky and they saw the trails that are being left behind planes. Now, when planes fly through the air, sometimes they essentially create a cloud behind them. And this is kind of an interesting, like, physical process, and it's a little bit complicated and a little scientific, and a lot of people really don't understand what's going on. But basically what's happening is the lines you see behind planes are actually a type of cloud, and they've actually got a name, cirrus. I think it's like basically human-made cloud. There's a Latin name for it. But someone was looking up in the sky one day and they saw these clouds, and they noticed that sometimes the clouds behind planes, which we call contrails, were spreading out and covering the sky. And they personally hadn't noticed this before, and they thought this was something new. And they started looking into it, and they kind of came up with this weird conspiracy theory that the jet fuel back then was a new type of jet fuel, and it was more toxic, and the government was trying to cover it up. And this is a very old version of the theory, so it actually goes back a long way, back to the 1990s. But kind of fast forward a few years, the theory has morphed over the years through various different versions. And one of the versions is that the government is spraying to try to control the weather and to try to control the climate, and that the trails we see behind planes are actually to do with that. They're trying to actually alter the climate. But if you actually look into the science of it, it's very interesting. You can look in any book on clouds over the last 70 years or so, and you can see that these actually are just a type of cloud. That's why you see them in books on clouds. They're called contrail clouds. And it's something that has been well understood by scientists for a long period of time, but it's not something that people pay attention to. And so something you kind of alluded to earlier, like you didn't really hear about these things before. And something I found is that when people first hear about this conspiracy theory, that is when they start noticing these trails in the sky. So a lot of people actually think that the chemtrails thing just started, say, like 2 or 3 years ago. There's lots of people who think it started in like the 2020s when they had a lot of spare time on their hands. Some people think it started around 2015. Some people think it started around 2006. But really, this is something that's been going on a very, very long time, and it's really just normal clouds being formed behind planes.
Yes, I mean, the way you're talking, Mick, it just sounds so obvious. Of course, it's clouds behind planes. But as you and I both know, a lot of people have decided that that is not the case. You identify the 1990s as the birth date, or roughly the period when this started to become current amongst conversations. I know you've done a lot of research on other conspiracy theories or ideas that are not the norm. Would you say that it came at a time when people? I mean, I'm trying to understand why suddenly chemtrails. Do you know what I mean? I can understand, for example, JFK or 9/11 or various other conspiracies that have come and gone or are still around. But why chemtrails? I mean, of all the things to think about, as I said at the beginning, I never until I heard of this, as you've identified, thought that there was anything suspicious about planes flying across the sky. Was it a kind of an urban legend, or was it a bit of an inside joke in the aviation industry?
Not really, no. I mean, people in the aviation industry didn't really know about it until it kind of became more of a bit of a mainstream popular conspiracy theory. It's not something that people would have even remarked upon, because it's something you'd see every day. When you're a pilot and you're high up in the sky, you see the various different clouds, and pilots all have training in aviation weather. And that's another interesting aspect of it. The contrails form at 30,000 feet. And this isn't something that any of us on the ground really have any experience of, like what is the weather like at 30,000 feet or higher. Now, 30,000 feet is basically the top of Everest. Everest is 29,000 feet plus a bit. And obviously, you look at the top of Everest, it's very, very, very cold. And they go there in the summer when it's the warmest and it's still freezing cold and they still freeze to death. So when you're at 30,000 feet, the air up there is super, super cold. And so what's actually happening there isn't something that people on the ground can really relate to. And this is something that actually leads to the ease at which the conspiracy theory spreads, because you can point to something that's in the sky. You're down on the ground, it's a lovely warm day, it could be in the summer, and you see this cloud forming in the sky, and you think, why is that forming? And then someone tells you the explanation that it's actually ice crystals, and you think, well, that can't be ice crystals, it's a lovely sunny day, so it must be something else, the government must be spraying something. So it's very easy to kind of leverage the lack of understanding that regular people, you and I, don't have about what's actually going on at 30,000 feet. But, in a more broader sense, contrails are kind of like a very easy conspiracy theory to get into because it relates to something you can see. You can see it every day. You can look up and you can see a plane going across the sky. If you watch it for a while, sometimes the trail will spread out and cover the sky. You can see that happened. And if someone has told you, well, sometimes these trails spread out and cover the sky, you think, aha, that's something that actually happened. I saw it happen myself. And if you don't listen to the meteorologists and the scientists who tell you exactly why that happened, and if you don't look at history and see that it's been happening since the 1920s essentially, then it's very easy to get sucked into this narrative that it is actually government spraying, when there really is basically zero evidence of that. You can go through all of the claims of evidence that people make about chemtrails, and you can explain them one at a time. And there really is one of the most baseless conspiracy theories, but also one of the easiest conspiracy theories for people to get sucked into.
Well, let's get into that, Mick, because I'm going to play the skeptic in reverse in your instance, because I'm going to say, okay, we know that governments do bad things to people. Of course, they're spraying us all with chemicals for whatever reason they have, some global plan. You've met me on a transatlantic flight, and I'm postulating these ideas. Where would you begin to demolish those sort of very common arguments in popular culture?
Sure. Well, I mean, the argument there is that the government has done bad things in the past, so they must be doing bad things now. But it doesn't tell you what bad things that they are doing. And it doesn't tell you that they're going to be doing exactly the same things that they did in the past. Now, there are some bits of evidence for the chemtrail theory. For example, there's a thing called weather modification. And weather modification is something that actually happens. It's called cloud seeding. They fly small planes over clouds, and they spray silver iodide over them, and it makes them rain a little bit more or snow a little bit more than they would normally have otherwise done. And this is a real thing. A lot of people, when they discover this, they think, aha, there's the real evidence for chemtrails. But the thing about that particular claim of evidence is that when you do cloud seeding, it doesn't actually leave a trail. They burn these flares behind the planes, or they spray stuff out, and it's just basically this invisible powder that comes out, and it makes the clouds rain a bit more. It doesn't leave trails at all. It's done by small planes. So all these bits of these claims of evidence that you try to bolster the theory with, they don't actually hold up. There's another claim that back in, I think, the 50s and 60s, the government was testing how would biological weapons spread. And they sprayed some stuff in the air. I think it was zinc cadmium sulfate, which is a slightly phosphorescent chemical. They sprayed that into the air. They sprayed like a harmless bacteria in the air to see how it would spread. And they would basically, they're trying to figure out if the Russians, this was back in the 50s and 60s, if the Russians attacked us with biological weapons, what would we have to do to try to defend ourselves? How would it spread? Like, where would we need to spend resources? And so they did these spraying experiments. But again, these were spraying experiments that were done, the kind of a one-off basis. They didn't leave trails in the air, and they were essentially harmless. They used things that they thought at the time that were harmless, because it was back in the 50s when people thought smoking was okay, so it wasn't entirely harmless. But there's nothing that actually ties what the government's done in the past to these trails you see in the sky. And the things the government has done in the past, like these spraying things, really aren't particularly like evil or anything like that. They're just regular science experiments, like one-off science experiments. So if I was to meet someone on a plane and they were to tell me, like, I think the government's spraying because the government's done evil things in the past, I would ask them, where's the actual evidence that they are doing this now? And I would listen to what they think is the actual evidence, and I would try to address that. And usually the first thing that they would say is that normally contrails behind a plane will dissipate in a few seconds. That's the basic claim that a lot of people in the chemtrail community will make. And that's something that's just basically wrong. A contrail is a cloud, and it does exactly the same thing that other clouds do. So if you can see clouds in the sky, clouds don't just magically disappear in 2 seconds. Clouds hang around all day sometimes. Sometimes they spread. Sometimes they disappear. Depends how humid the atmosphere is. So you can just go through each claim of evidence and address it and try to explain. And it's an interesting conspiracy theory because it does have so many well-understood claims of evidence that have been explained, and yet so many people still believe it.
But just listening to your explanation there, Mick, there's an element where you have to understand some science, and it's not popular science. The science of clouds or aviation fuel or however that works is not the stuff that most people spend their time researching. Do you think that's part of the problem, that it's a kind of easy thing to get into with the idea that the government's up to something, rather than taking the time to actually research, as you've done, what this phenomena is, how it's caused, and its scientific basis?
Yeah, there's definitely an issue where the science is a bit difficult, and I actually try to stay away from the science as much as possible when trying to talk to people, because most people don't know very much about science, and if they do know, it's often not the relevant science. They'll know something about something that's not related to cloud seeding, or not related to cloud nucleation, which is the technical term for cloud seeding. But you don't actually need science that much. You really more need a little bit of history and just be able to read books. And one of the best tools I found for explaining this to people is to look at all the old books on clouds. I have on my bookshelf here, I've got quite a collection of books on clouds, and I've actually made a video called 70 Years of Books on Clouds, which I actually made 10 years ago, so it's now 80 years of books on clouds. And the last 80 years of books on clouds, you go through each one, and they all have a little section on contrails. And they all have little sections that saying contrails sometimes persist and spread out and cover the sky. So you've got this historical record of just regular old cloud books. They're not like science books or anything. They're just books about, here's a cumulus cloud, here's a nimbus cloud, here's a cirrus cloud, and this is what they do. And it's not that complicated. And also just history in general. If you look up at lots of old photos, you will see contrails that persist and spread back in World War II. There's a few before World War II, but that's when it really took off because there was lots of high-altitude plane flights in World War II because they needed to fly the bombers very high. So that's when people really started to notice contrails. And there's lots of photos of, lots of contrails in the sky, crisscross patterns, all the things that people say are actual evidence are things that existed before 1990. And that you can actually find lots of photos of them. And I have lots of collections of photos of them. And they appear in old videos. The movie Spartacus, which I think was filmed in the 50s or 60s, has some contrails in the sky. It was a little continuity error where, Spartacus obviously is set in Roman times and they had plain contrails in the sky. They tried their best to remove them, but they ended up with a few in the sky anyway. Lots of other films have contrails in the sky. So there's lots and lots of evidence that what we're seeing isn't anything new. They're just normal contrails, normal clouds.
The problem with you, Mick, is you're confusing me with facts and with science. and you must be aware that there are people who will say Mick West is a control agent. He's propagating a government line. He's got some science, but he's really shielding the nefarious actors in the background who are up to this. I mean, I'm using hyperbole, obviously, but is there an element whereby even if you give me the science, even if you give me the facts, this has become a kind of belief system, part of a belief system, which, given your work, your other work, I mean, how do you actually dislodge something which is not based on something, but something which is a deeply held belief?
Well, it's not going to get dislodged by me just spewing out a whole bunch of facts and telling people things, because obviously, as you say, people are not going to trust me. And I would encourage that. I would encourage people to be skeptical of what people are saying, what people are telling them. And I would extend that to the other people as well. Like just because you think that I'm perhaps in opposition to your ideas, yes, you should obviously distrust me, but also distrust people who you are agreeing with. If someone is telling you something, verify it. Now, when I tell people things, I'm not saying, trust me because I'm an expert. I'm saying, here are these things. My bookshelf right here has all these books on clouds, and I can just actually show them to people. I've actually taken them to places like Chemtrail conferences and shown these books to people. And you can show them online, but you can also say, go to your local library. You'll find some of these books. Go to a bookstore. You'll find more modern versions. And I've actually found a lot of these books in secondhand bookstores. Then go online and look at these old movies. Look at these movies that have these contrails in. There's a famous bit of evidence of chemtrails that keeps coming up, which is photos of planes with lots and lots of barrels in. And people say, well, why would these planes have barrels in if they're not spraying? Well, it turns out the barrels are things called ballast barrels, and they're used when they build planes originally. They have to test them for weight and balance, so they use these barrels full of water in the plane to simulate passengers. And people can then go and look this up. They don't have to trust my word on that. They can look at all these references. There are books from the 50s and 60s that have pictures of these barrels. There are videos of the barrels where people talk about the barrels and what they're used for. And there's lots and lots of examples of things that they can actually look up. So it's more kind of, teach a man to fish here. I'm not actually telling you this is how it is. I'm saying, here's the information. Here's where the information is, and you can check this information yourself. You can do your own research, but don't just limit yourself to doing research that confirms things. Do research that actually checks things to see if those things are valid. I think we're kind of living in a unique time in that we have a confluence of two significant factors with that. The first factor is that the internet is kind of a peak internet. We have very rapid internet at everybody's houses. Everybody's on social media. Mainstream media is very much in decline. People don't trust mainstream media, and they never really have. But now they basically have dropped it entirely, and a lot of people are getting all of their news from the social media. which means they're getting much more fragmented information. But then the other factor besides that is that we have an administration, the Trump administration, which is kind of in some ways predicated upon conspiracy theories. There's a lot of belief in the people who support Donald Trump that there is a deep state that is kind of opposed to Donald Trump. And Trump's kind of position has been to somewhat put himself up as the opponent of the deep state. And to do that, he needs to actually promote the idea that all these conspiracy theories are real. But, something we should be clear on from the start is that there are real conspiracy theories. It's not like when we say something is a conspiracy, that means that it's false. When we say something is a conspiracy theory, that means that it's a conspiracy idea, a suggestion, or a theory that hasn't actually been proven to be true. So it's still just a theory. It's still just essentially a hypothesis in science that people have put forward. But there's very, very real conspiracies in history. You just got to look back through history. We know that there was the Watergate cover-up, for example, a fairly big conspiracy theory. It was the Iran-Contra scandal, the arms for the selling of arms to Iran to finance the Nicaraguan Contras, which is a secret thing with hidden from Congress. So there are real conspiracies. There are conspiracies that are fairly deep within government. There are conspiracies that run in business, and there are conspiracies that are done by individuals. So calling something a conspiracy isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that is increasingly now the waters have been muddied. And I think in large part that is because of social media.
Well, let's take one very famous conspiracy theory, depending on your point of view, and that is JFK and the assassination of John Kennedy back in Dallas in 1963. Some people have suggested that it was the CIA that came up with the term conspiracy theory. Other people have said that's not the case. What's your view on that, to begin with?
Well, the term conspiracy theory did actually exist before 1963, before the JFK assassination. And the CIA did actually use the term conspiracy theory, and I believe it was in 1966 or 67. And it was actually after the RFK assassination. And they were concerned about conspiracy theories spreading, and so they mentioned that there were problems with conspiracy theorists. I don't think they actually used the term conspiracy theory. And they were trying to address it because they realized that rampant conspiracy theories could undermine the perceived authority of the agency. So if everybody in the US believed that the CIA killed Kennedy, that wouldn't be a good thing in some ways, regardless of whether they killed him or not, which I don't think they did. But let's assuming for a second that they didn't, then it's not a good thing to have everybody believing something that is false about them, because no one's going to trust the CIA. But you actually, if you look at the history of the term conspiracy theory, you can plot a graph of its usage. If you go back with Google book searches and Google newspaper searches, you can plot how frequently it was used. And you can see before JFK, there was a little bit of usage of the word conspiracy theory. After JFK, there was basically the same. It was pretty much unchanged. And then around the time of the Robert F. Kennedy assassination, it started to increase. And I think that was probably because, it's like 1 is coincidence, like 2 is an accident, and 3 is a conspiracy. It seems like something was going on, and people started talking about it a lot more. But you look at where the CIA's memo, where people say they came up with a theory, it fits into that. There's no blip at all. It doesn't actually change the dial. It actually started just basically slowly ramping up after the JFK thing. So I don't think the CIA came up with the term. And I think people say that they came up with the term to discredit it. But the term itself wasn't a discrediting term back then. It was just a way of describing what's going on. The term conspiracy theory has become something of a slur in a way, simply because there are so many crazy conspiracy theories. And if all conspiracy theories were very straightforward and simple and like good theories, we wouldn't be saying this. And if we call them something else, like, I don't know, suspicious theories or government action theories or something, all that would happen is that particular theory, that particular name would be the one that became the slur. So, no, I don't think the CIA came up with it, and that's just what they're called.
But just taking what you were saying there about the deep state, I mean, we can probably trace some of the skepticism about governments to the events of Dallas 1963. I know your researches are about debunking conspiracy theories or putting them under the microscope, so to speak. But just taking the JFK assassination, I don't know if we'd agree, but I mean, looking at it very objectively, the government haven't helped matters anywhere along the way. In fact, they seem to have sort of poured fuel on the flames of conspiracy theorists at every turn. I mean, just recently, as you know, there was talk of releasing all the files, and people were wondering why these files hadn't been released so many years after the assassination. Do you not see that there's a way in which the ideas of deep state are sometimes brought about by the actions of the state, if only inadvertently, in what they're doing or not doing?
Yeah, that's a big problem, actually. And the problem arises because the intelligence agencies have this basically an overclassification problem. They tend to want everything to remain secret as long as possible, kind of a just-in-case thing, and they don't really see the public good of actually releasing this information. And this is an issue we've had with UFO cases. I do a lot of investigating of UFOs, and the government just basically is very cagey about all these cases, and it's largely because they are military. And with JFK, a lot of the documents that are being held back are to do with sources and methods, like how did the intelligence service work, and relationships and diplomatic relationships back then. So they would have communications between different countries, and they would have things like spies in different countries. And even now, there's some reluctance to maybe spoil the diplomatic relationship we'd have with the country by exposing the fact that we had a spy in their government in the 1960s. Of course, it's been a really long time, but there's this just-in-case attitude, which I think pervades the military and the intelligence community. Is like, why would we release this? And it takes some kind of political some political impulse, some political motivation, some actual push to actually get it out there. And I'm personally very much in favor of more open government. I would like to see more UFO documents, and I would like to see all the records released about these things in the past, even if they are a little bit embarrassing to the government. I'd rather clear the air. So yeah, I think that's definitely a problem. And then eventually, when it comes to something like Donald Trump saying, let's release all the documents, that obviously fans the flames. I mean, why didn't we have the documents before? Well, it's pretty boring reasons, really, but it makes for a cool story.
Well, leaving that aside, I'll come back to that point, Mick, the entertainment factor that there is in many conspiracy theories. But just sticking with this idea of the deep state, there may be sort of elements which, as you say, the intelligence agencies don't actually help matters sometimes because of the way they're structured and the way they operate. However, there's a kind of even more sort of accentuated conspiracy theory that a lot of these conspiracy theories are kind of a reverse deception, if you know what I mean, that people spend an inordinate amount of time and energy focused on whatever it happens to be, an assassination or a bomb or whatever it happens to be, instead of focusing on real issues or real problems. It's a kind of way of distracting the masses. Do you think there's any sense to that? Do you think there's any, in your researches, have you come across anything that makes you wonder that maybe the governments are manipulating as much as the conspiracy theorists?
Well, I think that conspiracy theories as a distraction is definitely a real thing. I think that if people believe in chemtrails, for example, then they're going to be much less concerned about industrial pollution. So you could argue, maybe DuPont or some big chemical company is trying to promote these theories of chemtrails, and the government spraying things to distract from the fact that they're poisoning the rivers. or it also distracts from things like global warming and CO2 emissions. If you think the government's controlling the weather, why would you bother with that? And if you think that the government is assassinating people left and right, like why would you trust the government at all? So there's definitely an issue of it muddying the waters and it causing problems and it distracting from real issues. The question is, to what extent is that being promoted by the government or by other people? We know that there are efforts by foreign countries to try to stir unrest in the United States, and probably the same with us in their countries, by promoting conspiracy theories. So you get Russian bot farms now, like on the internet, promoting conspiracy theories. And in the past, there were probably Russian, what we call active measures, trying to actually promote conspiracy theories. And the government has also done things like allowed conspiracy theories to distract from real things, like with Roswell. The original Roswell incident was portrayed as being like flying saucers, and the government kind of rolled back on that a little bit, but they kind of let the conspiracy theories roll. And really what was going on there was the top secret project called Project Mogul that was using weather balloons to detect nuclear explosions, which we didn't want the Russians to know about. So the government allowed conspiracy theories and possibly even promoted them to a degree to cover that up. And we know they've done that with other things, like the U-2 bomber. Was something that would fly at very high altitudes, and pilots would report it as a UFO, and it was top secret. Not the U-2 spy plane, sorry. And they wouldn't wouldn't explain what it was. They would just say, well, it's a UFO. We don't know what it was, and they would allow this to continue. But I'm not sure exactly how much of that is deliberate and how much is just exploiting things that would happen anyway, because conspiracy theories are going to happen. And by not debunking them is essentially the same as promoting them.
But there's also, I suppose, a lot of conspiracy theories could be nipped in the bud by just greater transparency in government, would you say? For example, if the Warren Commission had done its job properly, maybe in the mid-60s, we wouldn't have had 60 years of debate, counter-debate and conjecture. Do you think there's an element where, as I say, the government really doesn't help this by dismissing conspiracy theories as simply that, rather than saying, here's the facts, here's the evidence, make up your own mind?
Well, the Warren Commission did do a fairly detailed job. They did recreations of the shooting. They had a guy trying to recreate the shots, and they managed to do it. They did a whole bunch of things, but when you have an investigation and lots of people are involved, there's inevitably going to be some questions that are kind of unanswered. There's the big issue of, was there a third shot? And there was a very tentative bit of evidence of like a little noise on a tape recorder on a police motorcycle. There was probably nothing. It's probably just like a backfire or just a bit of static or something like that. But because you can't say definitively what it is, you get this, what we call the conspiracy theory of the gaps, where if there's a little gap in our understanding of what happened, then it's very easy for a conspiracy theorist to get in there and spread. So even if the Warren Commission did a very good job, there's still always going to be little questions. There's still going to be unanswered things. Why did somebody say they saw someone on the grassy knoll? What was that guy doing with his umbrella? And these questions, they don't get answered immediately or even for decades later. It's inevitable. I don't think no matter what the government did back then, they would have actually managed to nip it in the bud, because unless you had a video recording of Oswald doing the shot from multiple different angles, you're not going to convince people.
Well, there may be an element whereby some of the conspiracy theories come out of traumatic events, the events of Dallas 63 or 9/11. But sometimes the conspiracy theories seem to breed in sort of strange places. I'm thinking, for example, the ever-increasing debates around the Apollo moon landings, and in particular the landing on the moon in 1969. You can imagine deep state, and I know there's an element of deep state that's baked into that theory as well. But given your researches and all your time spent in this world, is there something where it's almost like a psychological way of dealing with certain events?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. Major events like national tragedies like 9/11 or the JFK assassination, people want to have some kind of understanding of what happened, and they want proportionality. They don't want to think that, it's just some guy shot the president and that was it. It's just so simple. It's just some guy decided he was going to shoot the president. He bought a gun, he planned it, and he shot him. They want it to be something bigger because it's such a big event. I mean, these are the biggest events in human history, in recent human history, like the JFK assassination, the moon landings, and 9/11. These are massive worldwide events, and the kind of the mundane explanations of them seem very unsatisfying to people. They think a bunch of guys who lived in caves in Afghanistan defeated the greatest military in the world. It's kind of an understandable kind of disconnect there. But even though that's exactly what happened, and it wasn't just a bunch of guys in caves, it was a well-funded operation. But they want to find a proportionate explanation that they think fits their worldview and I guess makes them feel a little bit better about the world, because the fact that just the world is so fragile that just one guy with a gun can cause all this chaos is just something that doesn't really compute in their brain. And with the moon landings, it's a big event. It's going to get a lot of scrutiny, and then you get people finding these what they think of as gaps. They say like, oh, here's a flag, it's flapping on the moon, and there's no air on the moon, so it shouldn't be flapping. And then they ignore the actual reason why it's flapping, and then they go with that. They find these little kinks in the armor, and for a lot of people, when this happens, they're doing it because it makes them feel special.
Yeah.
To have discovered something about the world, or to know something. It makes them feel that they have privy knowledge to some actual deeper understanding of the world. If you know the moon landing was fakes, but all the people around you think that it was real, then you're the one who's special. You're the one who's actually got the real view of reality, and all the other people are the stupid ones. So that's kind of an emotional attractiveness that conspiracy theories have that really helps them spread.
Yeah, it's fascinating just listening to you say that, Mick, because I was just coming to the same conclusion, that there's an element that you're on the inside. You've got some sort of Gnostic knowledge, that you know more than other people. I mean, in discussing people who hold various views on things, would you say that it's almost a psychological type, almost, or a certain type of person who is drawn to conspiracy theories?
I think to a degree it is a psychological type, but I think that the traits that conspiracy theories have, like a need for uniqueness, a need for proportionality, a need for attribution, these are things that all of us have. Like, we all enjoy feeling special, and we all like it when we know what actually happened. Maybe they're a little bit heightened in some people, but anybody can become a conspiracy theorist. It's not so much about their mental state going into it. It's more about the things that they are exposed to and their life circumstances. And most people get into conspiracy theories kind of by having too much time on their hands and then discovering something. A lot of people going to conspiracy theories are young men who, in their 20s, they spend a lot of time doing this stuff, and then maybe they'll get married in their late 20s, early 30s, have kids. They don't have time for conspiracy theories anymore. They don't have time to ruminate. They don't have time for these things to kind of fester and grow in their brains. And so they fall away from them. So a lot of people just fall into conspiracy theories, and they're very normal people. It doesn't mean that you're a crazy person if you believe in conspiracy theories. It just means that you have been exposed to conspiracy theories. And if they're false ones, then you haven't been exposed to the actual explanations.
We're running out of time very, very rapidly, Mick, but just very quickly, if you could tell me, because we're talking about conspiracy theories, we know some of them are very entertaining. We love, the way in which they're constructed, but sometimes they are for us just an entertainment because we're not personally, 60 years ago in Dallas. We don't know actually what happened. Do you think there's a danger in conspiracy theories for people in general?
I think there's a danger of conspiracy theories if they affect the individual and how they affect society. They can affect individual if it's a health-based conspiracy theory. Like a lot of vaccines are very perfectly safe and good for you, and yet people have been told that all vaccines are bad for you. And that's basically a conspiracy theory because it's not backed by science. And so that can be very harmful. And if people are encouraged to spend money in certain ways because they think there's a certain conspiracy theory, then that can be a bad thing. People are sold health supplements to protect them from chemtrails. And if people think that they don't trust the government, which is in some degrees a healthy thing, but if they don't trust the government based on essentially lies and false conspiracy theories, then they're going to make voting decisions based on that and not on real issues. So the real issues that are facing the country, the issues of the environment and the economy and social issues, are not being addressed to some degree because people are focusing on conspiracy theories. So yeah, I think there's a real harm from conspiracy theories to the individual and to society as a whole.
Well, Mick, you've given us a lot to think about. Tell people where they can find out more about you and the work that you do.
Well, they can follow me on my web forum, metabunk.org, and you can find me on Twitter at Mick West and on YouTube at Mick West.
Mick, thank you very much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.